get out and recruit. We feel like there's a lot of really good high school talent, in the state of Alabama and also really in the greater Birmingham area. So we've got really sincere interest in trying to invest in that more going forward. So a good opportunity for us to get out locally. And then also, this has been a pretty unique situation with, what's happened with our staff. So we try to take the week to get more organized as a staff as to how we're doing things. And then, of course, and then finally working with our players. We've still got a lot of young players that, are developing, fundamentally developing in our schemes. And then some guys that needed to get healthy. It's also an opportunity for us as a staff to go back and reevaluate things we've done from a self-scout perspective. And really try to address some of the areas we need to improve. So that's been good. I think it's also been a good reminder, I think there was a lot of excitement and energy around our last win, which was outstanding, and outstanding to see the fan base respond the way they did, which we really appreciate. But also a good reminder to our players, like there's no magic wand. We've got a price to pay. We got to get to work. And with them coming back after giving a little time on the weekend, we're expecting to see everyone take that mentality going forward. Obviously we're playing a really good team in UConn. Jim Mora is a veteran head coach. Really have a ton of respect for him and their program. They're 5-3 right now. Coach Mora, mentioned him being a veteran. Obviously, going back to been a head coach in the National Football League at places like the Atlanta Falcons, was a head coach at UCLA for some time and has done a great job at UConn. So. No, we certainly have a challenge ahead of us.
With everything that happened in the Memphis leading up to the Memphis game, the Memphis game also, would that have been tough to kind of turn around from that if you didn't have that bye week? And how helpful was it just to sort of get that out of your system a little bit?
I think we could have handled. I think we could have handled the turnaround. I really. But it does help. It does help, to just, like I mentioned, for our staff to get organized on, how we're delegating things and what our weekly flow is going to look like, and maybe, dive into a little bit more on what game day is going to look like. What could we have done better last game, in the game with just staff organization. So it does help having the bye, in such a unique circumstance.
You guys have obviously struggled a little bit on the road. Or do you plan on doing anything different this week, maybe just to switch things up, even for just a change for change's sake kind of thing?
I heard someone say a long time ago, a program doesn't work a group of people. People work a program. So I think the first thing is just getting everyone to take what we do and go do it better. Let's practice better. Let's meet better. Let's work our processes better. And then, so that's number one, I think. And I think that's a burden that everyone in the building shares. And then I think the second thing is that, there are things from a process standpoint that we want to constantly evaluate and see if we can improve. So there will be some things that we'll tweak that will hopefully help us. But I think that, doesn't pertain to playing on the road or at home or any of those things. I think it's just, the process of getting ready to go play a game.
And they're a team that hardly turns the ball over. Just what have you seen from Joe Fragano, the quarterback? I think he has 18 touchdowns, no interceptions. Just what have you seen from him?
Yeah, just, he's really an impressive player. He's been, incredibly efficient. You point out the touchdown interception ratio. He's, which is really, really impressive. And so he's been both productive, he's been aggressive, and yet efficient, and hasn't put his team in a bad position, helps him play good team football in all three phases. So, he's definitely, warrants the recognition he's received so far.
Alex, just a couple questions for me, kind of going back to that win over Memphis and the reaction from that. You mentioned the fans, the way they responded. What did you see from the fans, and what did that mean to the program to get that kind of response?
There's been a lot. One, I would say just even in game, I thought the stadium really came to life, which was really cool. Really good energy, from start to finish, but really picked up late. So we really appreciated that. And then I think, in the following week, just we've received a lot of support from different people in various ways, and even felt it when we went out on the road and recruited. So again, this really means a lot. I know there are a lot of loyal supporters and people that are really behind the program, and so just we're very grateful for it. And then at the same time too, we know that we've got to go get to work too on the next one. So that's going to be really important, and hopefully. Give them more to cheer about.
when we talked to you a couple of weeks ago, it was a tough week for you guys after losing your head coach. To win that game, how did you see the staff and the players respond, and maybe sense of what's changed from that win? And it was obviously sort of a big turn of events for you guys.
Well, I think, one, I think it does help create some confidence and some belief in the players. You go back, that was a tough week. I think the team was a little shook and rattled, and I think, maybe even you wonder, does it affect their confidence early in the week and how they feel about themselves? But I think that turned pretty quick. And so, the challenge was this: are you going to, taste a little bit of success, if you want to call it that, and, taste it and feel satisfied, or are you going to be hungry for more? And so that's really been the challenge. Is like, okay, you tasted it. Let's fan the flame. Let's go try to get hungrier to go get more, as we go forward. So that's really been our emphasis, after that game. And I think the guys in the bye week did respond well and practice well. But I think we've got to continue to push the envelope on, what we see as, a good practice. And I think our standards can keep going up.
How is Jalen Kidd now? How is he physically? And then how will you sort of attack practice with those two guys this week?
Yeah, I think Jalen has really progressed well physically and is doing better. I thought he got better through the course of the bye week daily. So that was really good to see. And Jalen, obviously leading up to the Memphis game, had a pretty darn good year. I mean, he was, I think, at one point leading the conference in passing. I think he was second in the country in completions per game. He was pretty high in completion percentage. So done a lot of really good things and made some, pretty big throws and showed a lot of toughness at different points. Then of course Ryder played very well too, and has had a good season in practice. And in the certain moments, we've asked him to play. So, and then Nate Rogers as well. Nate obviously played a role in the game and has played a role in some other games. So, our feeling is we've got, multiple talented quarterbacks, and we want to find ways to use all their talents. And without being any more specific than that, we're going to try to find a way to do that.
And with Nate Rogers, with a young quarterback like he is, a young player like he is, he made a big mistake with the fumble in that game. How do you sort of get him, a young player? Veterans might be able to, kind of understand it a little more, but how do you sort of use that as a teaching and kind of grow and learn from a young player making a mistake?
Yeah, great question. Nate was really hard on himself after that play. He was hard on himself in the game, even. And, one, it's, we talked about going to that game, you have to have great poise. You got to have great bounce back. And sometimes poise is responding to things that are out of your control. And then sometimes poise is responding to things that maybe you created. And, I think Nate, maybe really felt a little bit down on himself for what happened on that play. But, he may be called upon again later in the game. So he's got to find a way to bounce back. And he and I actually called him, that night. We talked about it, and he understood that. And so, it's one, it's learn from it. But two, wanted to encourage him that, hey, man, like the sun's going to come up tomorrow. We did win. But, let's, try to also avoid it in the future, and here's how we can avoid it. So, that's really, it was a really good learning experience, I think, for Nate, and hopefully he can eliminate it in the future too.
What did you see from your run game against Memphis that maybe you can take into other games and carry over that success?
Yeah, I think the offensive line did a good job. We talked about trying to control the line of scrimmage, in both the run and the pass game, and I thought they did that. Memphis, going into the game, had created a lot of negative plays, in the running game, and so we wanted to try to prevent that as much as possible. So I think the offensive line and the backs did a good job. Now on the flip side, there's another side of it too, where yes, there was some good production on offense, but we also had an opportunity to put the game away on offense. And so part of the challenge is, all right, hey, next time we get in that position where you've got a 2-score lead, I think it was 31-17 at a certain point, like put them away. Put them away. You have an opportunity to end the game on offense. It was great to see the way our defense closed the game out. It was really exciting, but we really could have finished that game, with the ball. So I think that's part of the challenges too. Is like, let's take the next step. And some of that, to your question, does involve the running game and being able to close the game out running the ball if we need to.
And then with Nate, I mean, he's had a little bit more usage the last few games. How much does he open up the running game and add that extra element? And do you foresee that maybe being a larger part as the season goes on?
Yeah, look, I think Nate really, has played a really good role for us. I think Nate is a good passer too, and Nate can really throw the ball. But in terms of his ability to run, it has helped us to this point. I think Nate is able to generate explosive plays in the running game himself. I think you can, one of his touchdowns this year was actually a called pass in which he scrambled. So that's another way that his athleticism can come to life. And then I think it can help the guys around him too, because hopefully, because he has the ability to throw and run, they've not only got to defend him, they've got to defend all the eligibles and every blade of grass. And so now maybe it helps your other runners too. So I think Nate can really add really good dimension to our running game. And, really we have pretty extensive packages for him every week. And it's just a matter of how much we, decide to use it for the game and as we get into the flow of the game.
Alex, even though you're just the interim head coach still, obviously we saw you out at some of the high school games locally. With that interim tag, could you just explain, even though you aren't the full-time head coach, what that means and how you still want to represent this program and try to get it to where it needs to go?
Yeah, look, I think, look, we love it here. We love UAB. We love the program, love the school, the institution, the city of Birmingham. And so, and we want to steward this responsibility well, for the remainder of the season. And I think it's, our job and our obligation really to try to represent the school and the university and try to, help the future of the program as much as we can, So I think and I think there is a lot to sell here. We've talked about that before. I think, the place is well located. We've got a great education here, but I think all the things are in place to have a really healthy football program too. And a lot of that I do think involves the local prospects and the local talent. So that was just something that was really important for us to get out last week and continue that process. And, especially with a lot of the guys in state.
How much defensively, how much do you feel like they can grow from seeing success last week or in the Memphis game, not only with the goal line stand at the end, but only giving up 17 points, defensively to a team that was averaging 40. I mean, how much do you think they can grow from that day?
I think all three phases can grow a lot from the game, and yes, I do think the defense can too. At the same time, I'm going to go back and say what I said earlier. I don't think there are any magic wands. I think really is that you've got to create the right habits during the week to show up on game day, and then go play with the effort, toughness, and intensity when it's time. So I hope that they can build on that and bridge that into practice in the right way. So that's certainly encouraging to see what we saw. But I just think that there's still progress to be made, and I think they can do that. But hopefully that gives them some confidence that they can.
And just as a head coach, when you see a defense, I talked to Steve Russ about this last week, but when you see Tariq Watson on that last series, running down their running back, tackle him a yard short, then making another play, to keep him out of the end zone. When you how much can a whole team learn from? Because he could have dropped his head, and how much does the whole team learn from plays like that from individuals?
I think the whole team can learn a lot. It's actually one of the first plays we showed them when they got back. We showed them that play, and it's really a great example of effort. But it's really, when you go back last week, one of the first meetings we had is we talked about, hey, look, skill level is important, talent's important in the game of football. Those things matter. Understanding the scheme matters, but the first thing before you get any of those things, you've got to have your competitive spirit right. And we talked about never giving up and fighting to the end, and that's exactly what those guys did there. Is they never gave up and they fought to the end. And I also think too, we really did talk about taking a no scoreboard mentality a little bit and just scrap, fight, compete, no matter what's going on in the game. And I thought they did a really great job of that down the stretch. And so we want to build on that again. We really do, and hopefully we'll be able to, no matter what the circumstances are.
Speaking of Tyreek, what have you seen from him lately? It seems like he's kind of coming into his own his last two games, and just how difficult is he? As an offensive mind, how difficult is a player like that to attack on defense?
No, he definitely creates a lot of challenges as an offensive coach, and I think he's really growing and coming into his own a little bit, and really I think the end of the game there showed that. And but I think we have a variety of guys that have yet to play their best football, and are really, we have, 5 regular season games left, and I think they, should all take that approach that, hey, their best is in front of them and he's no different. And so, which I think is exciting. I think there are still a lot of areas we can improve. I think that's one thing the bye week showed us is like, hey, if you really go examine yourself and examine our team, we have a lot of opportunities to improve. And then, hey, what could that create? What could that create if we do that?
With your running game, how much of it is kind of an RPO sort of thing with what they give you, and how much of it is just a called run and play?
You know, with our running game, we kind of have it all to a degree. We have, call it and run it runs. We have runs that can be checked and adjusted. We have runs that have RPOs on them. So that we really use all categories. And each game, we may live in one of those categories more than another. And then some of we can check from run to pass and pass to run too. That's another thing I failed to mention. So we really have it all, and it's a system that's kind of developed through the years that and I think in the last game you saw the RPO game come to life for us in certain instances, and in some weeks we'll call more of them than others, depending on what we're seeing and what we feel it gives us the best chance.
And when you have a guy as explosive as Solomon is, as you saw in that 80-yard run, kind of do you go into a game as an offensive coordinator or as an offensive play caller and say, man, we got to get him the ball this many times, or is it just kind of a matter of how the game plays out?
I think the game is far more about players than plays, and I do think, there's kind of two things here. I do think there are ways to force guys the ball and try to do things everything you can to get him a touch and make it hard for the defense to take him away by having a multitude of ways to get that guy touches. So I think that's important. And I think it's important that we game plan and call the game in that manner to try to feature our players. And then on the other hand, there's that old saying, as a quarterback, you need to take what the defense gives you. If you take what the defense gives you, eventually they give you the game. Don't try to force things. So, sometimes you have to, live in both of those worlds where we maybe have some intent, but at the same time, too, if something's taken away, then, maybe the ball has to go somewhere else and someone else comes to life on that play or over the course of the game.
Anything else? All right. Thanks, Coach.
All right. Thanks, guys.